40s tonight. Fair. Some late clouds, lows closer to 30. Cloudy Thursday. A few spotty showers will pass through. Highs upper 40s. More scattered showers for Friday. Highs upper 50s and near 60. Looking for a new career? Georgia Northwestern Technical College is where you need to be, featuring over 200 programs. Get focused. Get hired. Spring admissions deadline is December 3rd. More at gntc.edu. And I'm Storm Team 12 Chief Meteorologist Asher 4.
Radio 92.7.
Come see the Chattanooga Zoo transformed into a magical winter wonderland. Visit the animals and watch them open their gifts. Have your picture taken with Santa Claus, play holiday games and make crafts, or just enjoy the beauty of the zoo covered in lights at their annual Holiday Lights event every Friday and Saturday night in December, right up until December 22nd. It's the most wonderful time of year at the Chattanooga Zoo. For ticket pricing and information, go to chatzoo.com.
Nooga Radio 92.7's First Responder Friday.
If you would like to nominate a first responder for First Responder Friday, email noogaradio@gmail.com. noogaradio@gmail.com.
Nooga Radio 92.7's First Responder Friday.
Celebrate the holidays at the Chattanooga Symphony and Opera's annual family tradition, Home for the Holidays, December 15th and 16th at the Tivoli Theater. Enjoy a concert filled with lively and classic holiday tunes from the most wonderful time of the year, as the CSO is joined by the CSO Chorus, Metropolitan Bells, and guest vocalist Dee Danasco. Pictures with Santa will be part of the festivities. Tickets are available by calling 423-267-8583 or online at chattanoogasymphony.org.
The station you hear everywhere. Nooga Radio 92.7.
Good morning, good morning, good morning, good morning, beautiful people here in the city of Chattanooga. It's your girl Marie Mott with the Marie Mott Show. Y'all know what it is. I'm taking it from the streets to City Hall to the mayor's office. Can't leave out the police department. From the valley low to the mountaintop, give you guys a bird's eye view to what's going on here in the city of Chattanooga. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. We have made it to almost the end of the week. It's Thursday. It's cloudy outside. It's raining. So as you're going about your day, please take your time. Be careful. But I'm excited about the topic that I have chosen for today's show. I've covered it a little bit before, but it was more based on the book that I do recommend the listener, regardless of who you are, The Color of Law. If you have not copped that book, if you have not read that book, I am a reader. I believe in reading. It is fundamental. Please do yourself a service and purchase that book, because it talks about the historical nature, because of the historical nature of how inequities in particular are based in the color of law. And in particular, when we talk about wealth disparity in this country in between white citizens and those who are African American or Hispanic, many people do not understand. And I have the absolute help of Yale University. Yes, I came prepared today. I came so prepared. We're going to talk about it earnestly, honestly, and we're going to unpack some things. And I look forward, hopefully, to having this discussion with Michael Gilliland from Chattanooga Organized for Action. He and the organization put together a wonderful study in 2016 that I'm going to cover a little bit of information from that. And hopefully I'm going to leave a good portion of that to have a conversation with him sometime soon on the show, where we can have a communal type of conversation for the benefit of you, the listener. But I want to start this conversation in particular about how we look at the city of Chattanooga, the color of law, how we have praised this urban revival, but it has happened from illegal practices that are steeped in over a century of racism. And if we do not understand how we're going to close these equity gaps that we see, if we do not understand what causes these equity gaps, they'll never be closed. And if we are not mature enough to have conversations about race, people talk about it from a very broad overview, race relations. Baby, it's bigger than that. This is bigger than how we get along. What we're talking about is that this society has been based on the American dream. But for me and for people who are African American or Hispanic, there is no American dream. It is an American nightmare that no matter how hard we work, no matter how much education we may obtain, simply because of the color of our skin and the language or the cultural aspect of which that we have in this country, it will make it difficult for us to close our income gap and impossible for us solely to close our wealth gap. And if you don't understand that this is part of this is based all the way back from slavery, yes, the uncomfortable reality of slavery. But that's why I definitely bought with me in my arsenal Yale University, because people tend to respect Ivy League institutions in this country. And so Yale has done absolutely amazing work. And in particular, Michael Krauss with Yale University, who I have some audio drops that I'm going to be playing here in just a second. The article that I encourage everyone to look at is on insights.som.yale, or you can just Google Yale Insights. And this particular article is How Fair is American Society? I'm going to go ahead and start the show. Of course, the call-in number is 800-8949 if you want to call in and talk to me, as well as I'm streaming live on YouTube and Facebook. But let's go ahead and start this conversation with Mr. Michael Krauss from Yale University.
So I think the biggest takeaway is that Americans, people in general, in American society are really optimistic about how much we share resources in society, economic resources, between different demographic groups. In our study, it's about Black Americans and white Americans. Participants in our study estimated that things are really fair in terms of economic outcomes, when in fact, when you look at the best estimates based on publicly available economic data, you find wide chasms in terms of income disparities between Black and white Americans, wealth disparities between Black and white Americans, wages and health benefits. So those chasms are huge. They've been wide for decades. And our participants in the studies think that those divides are smaller and that they're naturally closing. So when I think about this, I think about the wealth gap, which is the largest. From the 1960s to like 2015 is where we have economic data. The gap is between white and Black Americans in terms of accumulated wealth is a gap of about 95 points. So what that means is for every $100 that an average white family has in wealth, an average Black family has 5. All right, so our participants, as they are trying to make these estimates for our studies, they're guessing about how unequal wealth is, accumulated wealth is, between Black and white Americans. And they think, they might think something like for every $100 that a white family has, a Black family has 80, right? So there's a little bit of a gap, but it's closing. But it's 5 and not 80. And that's the magnitude of difference that we see in our studies. We see that everybody sees that there was less equality in economic outcomes between Black and white Americans in the past. And so everybody has beliefs that things are improving. And really what that comes down to is that although we can admit to some inequality in the past, we're much more averse to admitting it in the present. We want economic inequality between Black and white Americans to be sort of naturally reducing itself over time. And so the progress findings that we have are largely due to these overestimates of current circumstances.
they're often due to these overestimates of current circumstances. So in the research that was done by Yale University, and like I said, this again is Yale Insights. The name of the article is How Fair is American Society? And this study was published September the 18th of 2017. So it's not that old. It's only about a year old. This study was with Michael Krauss of Yale, Jennifer A. Richardson, Paul R. Allen, professor of psychology at Yale, Julian Rucker, a doctoral candidate at Yale. So the first thing that is important, and the reason why I wanted to start this off with the respective study that was done by a prestigious university like Yale, is because I want people to understand that when we talk about disparities in this country, the perception of participants in particular, both white and black, think that that things are getting better naturally in this country. And what we fail to understand and really admit is that the gaps, and equity is really a buzzword, a hot word for 2018. If you look at a lot of work that has been done by Unified Ed, Apex. If you look at work done by COA has been talking about equity for a long time. The Unity Group here, Eric Atkins with the NAACP. If you look at the work that Tom Kunish and Tiffany Rankins are doing with Lincoln Park Neighborhood Association. There are so many people that have really been talking about equity for a very long time. But 2018 seems to be the year where everybody kind of wants to take part in this conversation. But I think one of the things that we have to understand, and in particular why I wanted to talk about redlining practices, and when we look and we celebrate this urban revival in the city of Chattanooga, we have to understand who has lost, and who has been absolutely discriminated against in this process of urban revival in the city of Chattanooga. You have to understand, if you go back, and part of this is that people have to be willing to do their own homework and research. I can provide as much as possible, and I love to absolutely do that. But everyone has to take up their own work and spend their own time dedicated to this work of understanding how do we continue to see that these gaps are widening and they're not closing. But part of that is our perception, which is based in our ignorance of these subjects. Because if we think in 2018, even though the study has put out that for every $100 a white family has in wealth, a black family only has 5. That's 95 points of difference, good people. And if we look at income, on average, for every $100 earned by a white family, a black family is only making about $42. Then we're looking at a gap of about 60 points. So there is these gaps in income. There's these gaps in wealth, and understand that wealth has nothing to do with income. Wealth is something that is accumulated over time. Well, if you find that in this country in particular, why I say that you need to read and purchase the book, The Color of Law. If you do not understand that Franklin Delano Roosevelt basically enshrined into law housing practices that were based in racial discrimination, then you won't understand why Black people don't have anything. You won't understand why we're so far behind and why it's so hard to catch up. You won't understand. And if the perception is that for every $100 that is earned in wealth and in income, is that the average person, white and Black, both think that the Black family or the Black individual makes $80 or $85 in income and wealth, then that's we don't understand the problem. And now redlining in housing is just one of the very many ways of how there is this disparity that we see. But it is a very large portion of why it is so hard. And in particular, when we talk about gentrification, when we talk about people legitimately being pushed out of their neighborhoods, and why I do not accept when people call in on my line and when I talk about housing and say that Black people just need to take the money and just be glad and sell. What you don't understand is that if we get pushed out of our neighborhoods, or the only time that we see investment in our neighborhood is with the process of gentrification, not this natural investment of one house, like Tom talked about, one house at a time. But no, it is this wave of people coming in, driving up property value to where even people who can maybe afford to keep their house can't afford to pay the taxes. Then what we see is that where does this next generation get wealth? If we're not able to purchase a home, we have to understand that the cornerstone of the American dream and wealth is housing. And if we don't own a home, and I understand everybody doesn't want to own a home, but if you want to have a family, if you want to have children, something to leave your children and grandchildren, if you want to leave them wealth that's going to start their life in a better circumstance than you have been raised in, then housing is the way. Housing is one of the largest and first steps that we're going to have to take. And so I wanted to have this discussion because what people don't talk about, this 2 Chattanooga situation that everybody dances around. And when I say everybody, I don't really mean the people, because I think we know what's up very well. The problem is that we have people sitting on city council. We have people in the mayor's office who have not taken these inequities serious. So I wanted to start the process of talking about this study. And again, that is Chattanooga Organized for Action did this study in 2016. I'm so appreciative. It is available, and I'm going to post a link on the Nooga Radio 92.7 FM page. I'm also going to post it in my forum. I encourage everybody to look at this very, very, very extensive study that was done by COA, and I'm very, very appreciative of this study. One of the things that we have to understand is that Black people just didn't wake up in this city and end up in the predicament that we're in. Part of the problem is that we have not seen investments, and the investments that we have not seen have been concentrated in areas that are particularly of color. And I think further, one of the things that we have to understand is that if the areas that are of color get diluted, right, that changes the voting makeup as well. And so why did we fight so hard at the end of the 80s and the 90s to have representation in legislative body and in government? Why did we fight so hard to get this far if we're going to be cut out of the future of this city? And there is no Chattanooga, and I'm coming out swinging today. There is no Chattanooga. Let me say that again. There is no Chattanooga without Black people, without Black history. And it's bigger than Bessie Smith. Bessie Smith is not the only one. Samuel L. Jackson is not the only one. You know, my great-grandfather poured hot steel in this city for 50 plus years. He's one of the many people who made this city what it was, with his sweat, his hands, and his labor. He made the city what it was. Chattanooga used to be a city that was filled with factories, and that was why it was so dirty. And that's in particular why I take it personal when people expect that we're not going to fight for our neighborhoods, or we're not going to fight to stay here. For you to tell Tiffany Rankins that she just needs to accept, she's fought the good fight, she just needs to accept because we've sold to people, even though we've seen in the Chattanooga Times article that came out a couple of Sundays ago that this dream that we've sold to people, it ain't really real. It's not really real. Then, oh man. Good morning. Talk to me. Hello?
This is the finance manager?
No. I'm sorry. That was the show that was before mine. I do apologize.
All right. Sorry about it. Do you have their number?
I do not have their number, but if you would just reach out to the station and we can get you their information. No problem.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. All right, so let's look at this before we close out on the first part of the segment. So in 2016, we had Who's Reinvestment, the failures of equitable home lending in Chattanooga, that was released by Chattanooga Organized for Action. COA analyzed the public HMDA data of lenders in the area from 2011 to 2014 and concluded that local banks were failing to lend Black African Americans and lend to Black African Americans and other minority communities. In the article, local community leaders spoke out against the Black lending practices, even offering tips for how to fix it. Some banks did also share their opinions, explaining that the data used doesn't paint the whole picture. However, the overall impression is that the banks in Chattanooga are discriminating against Black borrowers. The reality is that lenders are making FHA and VA loans to majority, minority, and LMI neighborhoods, but this article and others like it, because this isn't the only one, may focus on limited data such as conventional lending only. While bankers know the difference, the public often does not. And lenders' reputations may be undermined as a result. So what that says is the reason why I'm sure a lot of people did not hear about COA's study, or maybe we need to revisit it and read this. Because if the truth really came out about the lending practices, which are steeped in racism and discrimination against Black borrowers, what that says is that maybe it will be a situation where not only will we have lawsuits happening, but maybe people would start pulling their money out of these local banks because they can't buy a home from. Counting down. Oh, thank you. So for the listener, One Family Financial is 423-710-2009. I do apologize that you missed them on their show. But we're going to continue to talk about this. Discrimination is the reason. Racism is the reason that we have an urban revival. And make no mistake about it. If we're not going to tell the truth, how are we going to fix our problems? Race is not something that we can just skip over or gloss over. We got to be real and intentional. Stay tuned.
3, 2, 1.
Chattanooga Radio. Digital FM 95.3 HD4. 92.7 FM's news. Now.
78-year-old Samuel Little might be the most prolific serial killer in U.S. history. If he's telling the truth in his confessions, 3 of his alleged victims are in Tennessee. He confessed to the FBI that he killed a Jane Doe that he met in Chattanooga back in 1981. Her body dumped in Dade County, Georgia. A Walker County bus rear-ended on Happy Valley Road, the GSP quickly responding along with EMTs who checked out several students who said they were hurt. The GSP says an 18-year-old, Seth Klein, rear-ended the bus by accident. He is charged with failure to exercise due care, telling investigators that the sun was in his eyes and he didn't realize how close he was to the bus. And the Delta Queen steamboat could be coming back to Chattanooga. The U.S. House of Representatives signed a bill that would allow the historic steamboat to continue operations. The new owners say they plan to start operations again in 2020. Val St. John for Nooga Radio, News Talk 92.7, Action News Now.
Sean Hannity, weekday afternoons from 3 to 6 p.m. on Nooga Radio 92.7 FM.
Nooga Radio 92.7.
Martin Truex Jr. is off the pace and he is headed to the pit lane. Elliott Powers around the outside. Michael McDowell pops a right front tire. Here's Martin Truex to the bottom. Blaney blocks him off too. Meanwhile, Chase Elliott went 4 wide on the back straightaway. They're side by side for the lead.
Hear it live on Chattanooga's official NASCAR radio station.
Nooga Radio 92.7 FM, 95.3 HD4.
The voice of NASCAR.
Merry Christmas. Well, let's take a look at the naughty and nice list. Well, let's see here. There's Sonny, and there's Deb, and even Eddie made the list too. Well, let's look at the naughty list. Well, there's Billy and Greg. If you think you're on the naughty list, stop by Rick Davis Gold and Diamonds and get 70% off select merchandise in the store. Rick Davis Gold and Diamonds, 5301 Brainerd Road, Chattanooga.
For your small business, ending the year the right way can set you up for success come January. No need to let end-of-year panic set in. Easy Books and Taxes can help set up your books or new payroll service so that you can relax and enjoy the holiday season. With 35 years, bookkeeping, individual and business tax preparation, it's easy. With Easy Books and Taxes, you run the business, we keep the books. Call us today at 423-755-0821.
Your home is a constant work in progress. Repaint the walls? Yeah, easy enough. Leaky faucet? There's a video for that. But roof repair? You might want some help. That's where Chattanooga Roofing Contractors come in. They have 3 generations of roofing excellence you can count on. Leave the ladder in the garage. Go to chatroofing.com. That's chatroofing.com for Chattanooga Roofing Contractors, a roofing company you can trust. Man, you sure you know what you're doing?
Yeah, I worked with my dad on his truck all the time. Just one more bolt to go.
Yeah, wrong bolt. Today's truck ain't your daddy's truck. For repairs on today's vehicles, you need AMCO Transmission and Total Car Care of Chattanooga on Lee Highway. Stay on the road, not in the garage. AMCO Transmission on Lee Highway. Get it done the right way. The Thompson Pet Way. Yeah, I just put that anywhere.
Hi, this is Scott Schrader. Tune in Saturdays for We've Got You Covered. From finance to fixtures and all things in between, when it comes to your home, we'll help steer you in the right direction. We've Got You Covered, 10 to 12 every Saturday on Nooga Radio 92.7 FM.
Nooga Radio, Chattanooga weather.
Lots of sunshine out there for your afternoon. Chilly, but not as breezy. Highs lower 40s. Tonight, fair. Some light clouds, lows closer to 30. Cloudy Thursday. A few spotty showers will pass through. Highs upper 40s. More scattered showers for Friday. Highs upper 50s and near 60. Looking for a new career? Georgia Northwestern Technical College is where you need to be, featuring over 200 programs. Get focused. Get hired. Spring admissions deadline is December 3rd. More at gntc.edu. And I'm Storm Team 12 Chief Meteorologist Asher 4.
Nooga Radio 92.7.
The city of creators, they say. Get housing, they say. Black people aren't trying hard enough, they say. We need to work harder, they say. It's not our fault. We didn't make the rules, and how do we know the rules if people aren't telling the truth? How do we play the game if nobody's telling the truth? And how did we have an election cycle in 2017 and it wasn't a requirement whether you were an incumbent or not? It wasn't a requirement at every forum and debate for you to talk about this study that happened the year before. We better wake up. In 2020, it shouldn't be one person, whether they're running for mayor, whether they're running for city council, whether they're running to be a judge. Come on. School board. If we're not talking about these inequities from a perspective of research, how are we electing people to look out for our best interests? So I'm going to play another clip from Yale University. Shout out to Yale for doing this work. How fair is American society? Please go look up that article with Yale Insights. How fair is American society? Let's get into it.
Part of it is this widespread belief in the American dream in our society, and this belief that Americans hold. They have Cinderella stories about it. They have, you tell your children stories about overcoming economic obstacles to become, who you're meant to be, and successful and talented, and have all the material possessions and social benefits that you might have at the end of your life. That's part of the fabric of American society. And in this case, those beliefs can lead us astray, can lead us to not see the world for what it is, which is that essentially there's a lot of work that still needs doing if our reality and our economic reality is going to match up.
How do we level the playing field?
So there's a sort of first a general policy pivot that I think this suggests. So we've had in the public debate, there's been a penetration of thinking about inequality in society, and that's great. That's important, and that drives our discussion about creating a society that's fairer, that's more just, and more meritocratic. And you have political candidates thinking about these issues, but that debate, we think, is focused too much on sort of the outsized influence that the top of the distribution has on everybody else. If you create a more equal society by intervening at the top of the distribution, you will still have the problem that we observe in this work, which is people with, so white Americans will be on top, Black Americans will be on the bottom, and it will have little to do with differences between them in terms of merit, right? It's based on these historical structural factors. What our work suggests, though, is that if you take a historical look at inequality, a lot of inequality in our society is built based on the past, is built based on our older economic systems, which are based on discrimination, based on slavery, if you go back far enough. So this means that I see Black, white, racial inequality in society as causal to general inequality. The good news about economic solutions, policy solutions, so one of the big ones is to really aggressively fight discrimination in home lending practices, fight any kind of discrimination in real estate practices, and really being active about this, because one of the best ways to develop wealth is to own a home. If you solve these kinds of inequalities, these kinds of discriminatory structural practices in society, you will reduce the Black-white economic inequality gap, and that will reduce inequality in society more broadly. So we see thinking about racial inequality in society as a way to solve our general inequality problem. One of the dangers that we see happening is that we want to move past issues of race all the time because they are difficult to talk about, because they bring up really painful pasts that we have lived in this country. So it's much more comfortable for us to move past this, right? Let's think about it as something that happened in the past, and move on to a brighter future. But we cannot. Our paper suggests that what happens when you do that is you believe that that economic differences between racial groups in society are naturally solving themselves, are naturally going away, right? When we perceive that kind of reality, we can sort of go on with our lives. It feels kind of comfortable. But in doing that, we will miss one of the major challenges in our society. We want our society to be really meritocratic. We want our society to live up to the American dream. And we can't do that if this exists. And we definitely can't do that if we don't know it exists.
We definitely can do that if we don't know that these inequities exist. And if we're not looking at it from what are the causes, major findings, race matters in the Chattanooga lending market. Mortgage lending is substantially greater in neighborhoods that are predominantly white, and African-American neighborhoods are lending deserts. Let's think about it. I grew up in Bushtown or Churchville, just depends on what you want to call it. Blackford Street. There's only one bank that's in our neighborhood, and that's SunTrust. But I can't think of any banks that are close to that area. Now living in Oak Grove, I can't think of, with the exception of, what is that?
Bank of America. I can't think of another bank that's really, really close to that area. So there are these pockets where if it's a high African American populated neighborhood, there's really nowhere for us to go to even get a mortgage. So even when home loans are given in predominantly Black census tracts, few loans are being awarded to African Americans. A large part, in particular, largely minority sections of Hamilton County have been disinvested in by major lenders. There's a notable lack of investment in high minority census tracts, especially much of East Chattanooga, Alton Park, as well as disinvestment in the rural parts of Hamilton County in the northeast and northwest corners. There's a significant disparity in home loan origination between African American and white residents of Chattanooga. The disparity ratio of approved loans to relative percentage of population was 36% for African Americans and 107% for whites. The lending market seems to favor other minorities over African American minorities. In terms of both disparity ratio as well as total numbers of loans originated relative to population size, other minorities fare better than African Americans in the lending market. While white populations have the best advantage at securing a loan, non-Black minorities have significantly greater loan rates than the city's Black population for nearly every bank. Woo. Banking branches are not easily accessible in high minority and or low income census tracts in Chattanooga. As a metric of community investment, banking branches are often not present in the communities in most dire need of lending. And so what we have here, and that's just at the start of the COA study, these were their 5 major findings. And so they have a lot of charts and a lot of graphs. And of course, it's kind of hard to talk about this if you don't see it. But let's look at this. Let's break down race. White population, 269,322. Applications, 11,107. Approval rate, I can't talk. Approval rate, 64%. Disparity ratio loans, population size, 107%. Lord have mercy. Even our Hispanic brothers and sisters are doing better than us in this lending market. Hispanics, 13,040 at the time of the study. Population. Applications, 273. Approval rate, 56%. Disparity ratio loans, 48%. African Americans, population, 48,812. Applications, 855. Approval rate, 50%. Disparity ratio, 36%. And that's quite interesting because African Americans have been in Chattanooga for a very, very, very long time. What are the recommendations for moving forward? And before we get into the recommendations, why are we not talking about this? 2016 wasn't that long ago. This is a lot of information. Unified Ed has put out a lot of information about this. LaQuisha Ewing has put out a lot of information about this. That woman is a powerhouse of research. We have so many people who have dedicated their life to this work, whether they're from here, whether they've been here a little while, they're transplants. Eric Atkins has worked diligently. He has several articles with Chattanoogan about this information as well, looking at it from the perspective of a person that's lived in the city for a very long period of time. And how is it that we have political cycles that have happened since this study was produced? And I go to city council and I do not hear anybody talking about this. And I got to call people out. I do. When the study says Alton Park, is one of the areas, East Chat. Who's responsible for Alton Park? East Chat. I do believe that that's Miss Demetrius Coonrod. Anthony Bird. Sir, I live in District 8. I live in a lending desert. How is this when you get on your radio show and you talk about housing and African-American people need to buy housing? Why don't we tell the whole story of how it's impossible for the majority of African-American people in this city to get a loan? Good morning. Good morning. What's up, Chris? Talk to me.
Hey, I remember one person running for county commission who was mentioning, these disparities because if you look at county commission District 4, it has the highest pocket of poverty in the whole entire city, which is, it doesn't make any sense because look at what it's surrounded by.
And you say county
also,
District 4?
I'd like to note, too, looking at some of these studies, we need to look at outside sources because, like, Richmond University has done a mapping study, and I recommend people going and checking out that map, which I've posted links on to the page as well.
Thanks, Chris, man. I appreciate you so much.
Appreciate it.
And before you get off, you said that was County District 4, correct? When you were talking?
Yeah.
Which is Warren Mackey.
And you look at Bushtown is where some of the highest pockets of poverty is. And then you go to East Chattanooga and it gets worse. And then you look at Alton Park too. And so the question is, what do we do? And I think one thing is we need to look at creating jobs in those areas as well. Bringing in a grocery store could produce jobs in East Chattanooga. Look at community initiatives to do things to bring in these type of businesses as well.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Chris, for your comments. 800-8949 if you want to call and talk to me about this. But this is so important because we can set the expectations for people all day long. But if we don't understand why people are not making the mark, and it's nothing that's really their fault. This perception is that everybody that's African-American has terrible credit. That's not the truth. That's not the truth. Or everybody that's African-American has never saved a dime in their life. That's not the truth. And I hope I can get LaQuisha Ewing on here one day. She's such a busy woman to talk about African-American philanthropy with the Sankofa Fund. LaQuisha, if you're listening, please come on the show one day and talk to our listeners about Black giving circles and Black philanthropy. Because again, a lot of the reason why it's kind of difficult to do this work is because, number one, everyone's sensitive when we talk about race. We don't want to admit that the reason that it is impossible now is because of our practices or crystallized racism in policy and procedure. We don't want to admit that. Because to admit that means that we got to start cracking down on local banks and that the city of Chattanooga can't partner with SunTrust or Bank of America or any other bank if they're not going to equitably lend to Chattanoogans. I'm sorry, I can't put your name on Miller Park. And so for me, as a young millennial digesting this information and looking at this, to me, what this looks like is that the powers that be intentionally want to cut me out of the future of the city of Chattanooga. And why, when I was born here? Chattanooga, the right to live in Chattanooga is my birthright. I am a native of Chattanooga. I should never have a situation where I cannot live in the city in which I am from. My family has lived here. My grandfather came from the Bahamas and settled here. I have ancestors that came from Georgia as sharecroppers to find work and find opportunity here. Because at one point there was opportunity for African-American people to make good money in this city. But even still, it was hard for them to have fair housing. And by the color of law, because this was written into law, folks, You couldn't live in the suburbs if you were not white. You could not. And that's why we have segregation even now. Because it's still in practice where we do not have the opportunity to even get to making it a reality that we can have the American dream. Let's look at this. Recommendations. Continued publication of HMDA disclosure statements annually upon release. This is a role that COA hopes to continue to fill. Public scrutiny of lending practices is a prerequisite of changes. Public scrutiny. You catch that? Meaning that we have to have people in leadership and people in power, whether it's your pastor, come on now, whether it's your pastor, the people on county commission, whether it's anyone in the mayor's office. It's so many people who, whether it's the leaders of the neighborhood associations, I'm calling everybody out right now. Come on. The principals, the school board. We need people to stand up and have public scrutiny against what is going on in this banking environment. The information available, far more detailed than what we have covered, can be expanded on to include loans per census tract, as well as interest rates of loans given. Number 2, familiarity with the public processes, comment periods, and performance evaluations of the Community Reinvestment Act. A push for an increase in moderately priced housing developments. But if you go to ATM chat and look at the work that Helen Burns Sharp, when she called out River City Company and Miss White with River City Company, who has way too much power in this city, way too much influence in the city. She came out and stated that River City Company is not interested in affordable housing. Y'all don't believe me. ATM chat, Helen Burns Sharp, they weren't interested. They don't build. They're not worried about affordable housing. Oh, yeah, I'm stepping on everybody today. So we have to push for moderately priced housing, which will influence rental prices. Come on. Advocacy for community loan pools. These funds that can be invested in by multiple banks to increase resources for underserved communities while lessening the financial risk of any particular bank. A recent example includes $200 million invested by multiple banks in Los Angeles. If they can do it, why can't we? Bank approval for third-party loan originators. Look at this COA study. I'm going to put the information on Nougat Radio 92.7 Facebook page. Hopefully I can have Michael Gilliland come on and talk about this issue with you. I look forward to one day hopefully getting LaQuisha Ewing on to talk about Black philanthropy and giving circles. Never enough time, but glad to have the conversation with everyone. If no one today has taken the time to tell you that they love you, I love you. And it's nothing you can do about it. See you guys back tomorrow.
3, 2, 1.
Chattanooga Radio. Digital FM 95.3 HD4. 92.7 FM's news now.
78-year-old Samuel Little might be the most prolific serial killer in U.S. history. If he's telling the truth in his confessions, 3 of his alleged victims are in Tennessee. He confessed to the FBI that he killed a Jane Doe that he met in Chattanooga back in 1981. Her body dumped in Dade County, Georgia. A Walker County bus rear-ended on Happy Valley Road. The GSP quickly